Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Streamr's interview with the one and only author, podcaster, overall delightful, wonderful, nerdy person, um, Preeti Chhibber. Preeti, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing okay. I'm coming off a summer of deadlines. I just told you before we recorded, started recording. I have a book due tomorrow, which is great for leading up to the launch of another book.
I mean, booked and busy, right? Like you got stuff to
Exactly. Not complaining.
do. That's amazing. Well, speaking of a book about to come out, the main reason why we're here is to talk about Spider-Man's Bad Connection, which is your newest young adult Spider-Man novel. It's the second one in a series. We talked last year about
Hmm.
your first book, Spider-Man Social Dilemma. Um, I mean, generally, how excited are you that this is coming out? I mean, this seems like years of work, so
Yeah, it's wild. Now we're time is weird, but I think 3 or 4 years out from when I initially pitched this series. So it's bananas to kind of see it come to fruition in this way. This is obviously the middle book, which is um has its own challenges of
yeah.
having closure but still maintaining the pace for a trilogy. But yeah, I mean it's Peter Parker. It's my guy and a new story coming out in the world that I wrote. So that's really exciting.
That is very exciting. It's funny you mentioned keeping the pace. That was actually something I had written down to talk to you about. Is that I was actually really impressed. I sped read this book over the course of the last week, which was
Thank
kind
you.
of great. It's all like very fresh in my mind. Um, and I was really impressed by like it tied so well into the first book, and I feel like it still leaves so much room for more storytelling and what I'm now calling the Preethiverse. I don't know what you want to call it. I
Yes.
don't
That's
know.
it. Good. We're golden.
We nailed it. Um, yeah, and I was actually going to ask you what it was like trying to fit like a centerpiece into what I imagine this is. I don't know what you can say or what your plans are or talk about, but trilogy or series or,
Yeah.
or whatever this is. Yeah.
No, it's a trilogy. We always planned it as a trilogy because I was like, I'm going to need to, I can't just do open ended. That's
Yeah.
too hard. Like, I know there are writers who can like kill it at that, but I'm like, I need to know what I'm working towards. Um, so yeah, it was interesting because it was a lot of, I didn't write them one right after the other. I like wrote one, took a break to work on other stuff, came back, and then wrote this one. And getting back into the world, getting back into the like things that I created for the series was an interesting thing because I don't know why I did this, but I was like, science,
Yeah.
that's going to be the basis for this bad guy. Regret, full regret. I don't remember how anything works.
Um, well, okay, so if you're fitting like a middle piece in and you're
Mhm.
pitching a series, from the start, how much of the three books did you have kind of already planned out or like in your head? And then how much of this is, okay, I'm writing a second book, I have to make part of this up as I go along and figure that part out.
When I initially pitched it, obviously the first book was the most mapped out because that was the one I had to write right
Yeah.
away. The second and third books, I had like mini pitches for them. I knew who I wanted the bad guys to be, which is what's so wild about Across the Spider-Verse. Like using the spot, can I tell you? I was like, I picked the spot. So the spot is yeah. Oh, he's so cute. He's the villain of book two in the way Sandman was the villain of book one. And I was like, nobody uses the spot for anything, but I love him. He's ridiculous. Like I pitched it like several years ago. And then when I found out Across the Universe was doing it in the same year my book was coming out, I was like, oh no. But it's just great minds think alike, is how I'm thinking of it.
Yeah, I mean, I love the spot. I mean, obviously I have the pop. I've loved the spot ever since when I was little. The I think I had the episode of Spider-Man the animated
Mm,
series like on VHS, so it was one that I would just watch on repeat and I like fell in love with this villain. Um and I've even come up with like ideas. I'm like, "Oh, I wish more people would use the spot." And then it was like in the same year we have Across the Spider-Verse and then you. And that answers one of my other questions, which was like when you found out that Across the Spider-Verse was
I was like,
Spot.
no.
Yeah.
It's fine. I mean, I do think our versions of the Spot are wildly different.
Yeah.
Mine is much more sort of in tune, I think, with the comics, because that's where I went to for my inspiration, when I was like the Spot immediately, one of my favorite things obviously is the image of
course,
Spider-Man punching him and then punching himself in the face. It's iconic. It's so good. And that's sort of where I started, was like looking backwards and then building my character up from the pieces we got from him very, very early on in Spider-Man's tenure. And so they're very, very different, which is nice. And I realized I didn't like answer your question about the second book because I got tangented onto the Spot, but using him was a really nice sort of like anchor for how to build the story around him, with this other like sort of a thread that's going across all three books, and using him with the villain I created for the series was really fun. And there was a lot of like making it up on the fly, because my pitch for the book was like a paragraph initially. But it wasn't hard, because the Spot is such a great character to work with.
Yeah. Well, I also wanted to ask you, I mean, let's talk about the title and like how the Spot fits into this. And I think very beautifully he does connect to, like you said, that A thread and the messages you're trying to get across. But this is a book for young adults. And so I think there's clearly a message trying to be conveyed. So when you're titling a book Spider-Man's Bad Connection, and there's like a science-based villain, and there's a lot of stuff about technology, and you have the Spot and the way you characterize him, like what is it exactly that you're hoping young readers get from this when they read it, or even just the series as a whole?
I think for me, I talked about this last year, was media literacy is a big thing for me, of like, just, it's so hard to navigate the internet now. Like, it's a mess of advertising and disinformation, and who knows what's real and who knows what's not. And it's so easy to spread info that you think looks really valid and real, and then you'll like look it up somewhere and be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have let this thing define my thoughts on this subject. And so it's not that you question everything, but you think critically about what you're engaging with. And that's the very, very much the underlying message of this series, is just to think really critically about your assumptions and how you're approaching the world, and sort of the way people speak and share ideas in it. Yeah.
I mean, there's been a lot of attempts, and successful ones and unsuccessful ones, in the last couple of years, of taking Spider-Man and him as a character and translating him into like a modern world. That's something I think that you do really, really well. And just kind of answering those questions of what happened, like if Spider-Man has a cell phone, which of course he has a cell phone, it's 2023, and he's a teenager, if he's interacting with people on the internet, like who's real, who's not real, if you're spending too much time on your phone, this was a big thing in the first book, it's making you angry. Like there's an alien reason in this series for that, right? But I also find that, I mean, I interpret that as a purposeful, like when you're staring at your phone and just interacting with the interwebs consistently, like it's going to make you a grumpier person.
Yeah. 100%. I was like talking to my sister about this, because she was like, I read this thing that if you're on TikTok too much, it like affects your memory, which I wouldn't be surprised. I do think our attention has been impacted, and our ability to like hold attention has been impacted by like how quickly we're cycling through things. And so I was like, I need to put a limit on my phone, a screen limit. So I'm not like, because I'll be like, an hour will go by where I'm just like scrolling on TikTok, just like video after video. And then all of a sudden you're like, what did I do with my day? I don't even know.
Yep. I fully see that coming through in the book, and I find it delightful. There's also a lot of running themes of like corrupt officials and like mysterious companies and organizations and like all of these things. And this is stuff that we are very much dealing with on a regular basis in the real world. And it's something that, you know, the younger generation of today is dealing with in a way that no one has ever had to deal with before. So it is very cool and I think valuable to see you addressing that in a book. In a way where like it makes me want to get it for my baby cousin who's just started watching Spidey and His Amazing Friends, and I'm pumped about it. But it's like I will turn you into a little Spider-Man. It's
Yes.
going to happen. So another question I wanted to ask is, you brought up Peter Parker earlier. Obviously he is the star of the book. But I feel like you capture the essence of that character really well in a very specific way. So I might have asked you this last year too, but I kind of want like the updated answer of, when you're writing Peter Parker, what is it about him that you feel is most important to get right? And between writing the first book and then coming up with the second one and your thoughts on like the third one, what has maybe changed, or what have you learned about the character as you've worked with him more?
I think, you know, when I thought of this series, it was really important to me to show, especially in YA, is to show Peter not at the very, very beginning of his journey, but also not like him as Spider-Man as we know him. Just sort of that awkward in between, like really coming of age moment where you're making mistakes and you're not only are you like dealing with like being a teenager as a superhero, which is like prototypical Spider-Man of having all these pieces, but that specific point of teenage life where you're like uncomfortable and you want to do the right thing, but you don't always know what the right thing is. You know, Mary Jane is like another piece of that to show, even if you're not a superhero, like you have all these things that you are dealing with, not just like interpersonal, but like goals and ways you want to be active and do things. And so having that be a part of Peter was really, really important to me, of like balancing, maybe you want to do real, like do good. Maybe you really want to be able to help people, but what happens if it doesn't always work out? And if you like, you know, stick your foot in it and you just have to keep going. Cause I think that's the most Spider-Man of like, you keep trying, even though you keep getting knocked down. The difference in these books is sometimes he like knocks himself down.
Yeah. Yeah. I also, there's a couple, I'm not going to get into details. No spoilers for anybody, but there's a couple really nice moments that I love between him and Aunt May in this book. And every time I was reading one of those sections, that really struck me as like, this is Peter Parker. This is the essence of Spider-Man. Like, for all the superheroing that he does, I feel like you can really feel the hero when he's just talking about wheat cakes with his aunt, or talk just small, like feeling it, the warmth in his heart of like the people that he loves. And I was just wondering if that's something that you were trying to capture, or if you think that's something that just kind of happens naturally when you're writing the character the way you feel he is.
I think it's the latter, because every, like, I know Peter, there's Peter and then there's Spider-Man, but obviously they're the same person. And so you're going to see the Peter parts come out as he's Spider-Man and the Spider-Man parts come out as he's Peter. And you, like, it was just a piece of who he is. And like, I love his relationship with Aunt May. And, you know, there's a trope in young adult books where like the parents just don't participate. They're just not there. They get like push them off screen. But I want the parent to be there because I want to be able to show like how that relationship can also be so defining and so important when you're a kid, and what that means for someone like Peter Parker.
Yeah. Yeah, and that comes through. You mentioned Mary Jane earlier, but in his relationship with Mary Jane, in the first book, they were a little bit, you know, they were flirting. There was like a budding relationship, and in this book, they're dating, and they have to figure that out. Like, MJ's trying to figure out, how do I date a superhero and also like have my own life, because that's just as important. And Peter's like, how do I be a superhero and have a girlfriend? What was that like for you, kind of like conceptualizing that? It's a really big part of the story, I think, in a really important way. And it's sort of like characterizing MJ specifically in that context, and kind of your intentions with that.
Mary Jane's always been as important to the series as Peter is, right? She gets her own perspective. She has her own storyline, what she's doing outside of him. And so that felt like a really good sort of conflict point for the two of them, of like, they like each other, but what does that mean now when
Right.
they have all these responsibilities? Him with his Spider-Manning and his like Daily Bugle internship and all of that. And she has her activist life and her like things she wants to accomplish. And it's hard when, for someone like Mary Jane, where you're like, I want to be doing so much, but I'm dating someone who literally saves people's lives.
Right.
How do my problems stack up against that? And it's sort of like very important to me to be like, you don't compare. Like,
Yeah.
that's not fair to do in a situation like this. So having that be her through line a little bit in this book was really delicate, and sometimes it didn't work. Like, I had a note from my editor in one of the early drafts where he's like, you're not honing in. Like, you need to like up the conflict. And I was like, oh, I have to make them fight. No.
Yeah, no one ever wants these characters to fight, but sometimes it's gotta happen. Well, speaking of that, just as a quick sidebar, was there anything that you wrote for this book that ended up like not making the cut that you're really disappointed for? Like, is there a chance that you might try to include it in the future things? Can you talk about it at all?
No, actually, like there was nothing really like in terms of plot stuff, everything is everything I wanted to be in it was in it, because I think part of it is that I got approval so early
Mm,
for so much of this that that's not the piece that I'm super worried about. Like, it's more, it'll be in the like little nitty gritty like line edits that you have those
right,
conversations where you're
right.
like, I think this is funny, and someone's like, it's not funny.
Speaking of funny, when we were talking about Peter earlier, I was gonna mention, you also nailed the puns. Like it's just so great. I giggled so many times reading the book.
Yes.
I was just like, this is so silly in just like the most delightful way. Um, when you're writing the joke, like I feel like if I was writing this book, I would spend so much time just really hoping that my jokes were funny.
Yes. No, 100%. There's nothing worse than a note than like a note from your editor that is like, I don't get this joke. There's one in particular that stayed in because it's the first, literally the second I got an email from Disney being like, do you want to write an original like Spider-Man series? I wrote in my notes app this joke that I was like, this is gonna be in one of these books. And I wrote it, and my editor was like, I don't get it. And I was like,
Oh,
no, it's funny. I'm telling you. And I left it in.
staying in. Oh man. Okay, now I'm gonna have to go back and look at what the joke is. Try to figure it out. Well, I laughed at all of them, so clearly it works on somebody, which is great. Um, Speaking of the Daily Bugle, we get a little bit more time with Peter in the Bugle, and
Mhm.
specifically, we get a little bit more on the backstory of J. Jonah Jameson.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've always loved when Spider-Man stories delve into, because I do feel like J. Jonah is a much more complex character than a lot of people assume that he is. And it's really cool when you kind of see those different layers come out. Um, it also seems really fun to write. So when you're including someone like J. Jonah Jameson into this story, how are you hoping that he factors into all of this? And like what are you hoping the characters and readers are getting from him and seeing about him?
Something I love about Jonah, first of all, yes, writing Jonah is so fun because I'm just like, caps lock, let's go.
Yes.
Um, but something I love about J. Jonah Jameson that sometimes gets a little lost when he's on the more sort of like cartoonishly angry
Mm,
side is that he's actually good at being a newspaper man. He's
yep.
a good reporter. Like he has that in him to be great at that piece of his job. And what holds him back sometimes is his anger at Spider-Man. So I wanted to bring some of that forward because same, I really love when we get to see that part of Jonah, like the Chip Zdarsky spectacular Spider-Man run.
Yeah.
There's an issue that's just a conversation between Peter and Jonah, and it's one of my favorite Spider-Man issues of anything ever. It's so good.
Is that the issue with the like it's like a podcast or something like that, or are they just
No, they're just talking, and it's beautiful. And so there is this like very human piece to Jonah. As much as I love like him running around the office and being angry, like it was always fun to me to like insert those points of like, he's actually, there's a reason people want to work here and work for him, even when he's being terrible. Like, because they know they can learn from him and they know there is quality work to be done under him, except for this like one thing,
Yeah.
you know? And even with that one thing, he can come out and be like, all right, the newspaper man in me is butting up against the man that hates Spider-Man, and the newspaper man's going to win out sometimes.
Right.
And then sometimes the newspaper man does not win out, as we see. So that was really, he's a really, really fun character. Just, I'm like, this isn't a J. Jonah Jameson book, so I can't. Yeah. And I mean, I'm like,
although I would read a J. Jonah Jameson book.
Right. I totally would.
It would be amazing. Yeah, there's a lot of too throughout, aside from just like J. Jonah and some of the stuff that we learn about him, there's a lot of what I felt were purposeful homages to like iconic moments from Spider-Man's history. Again, I don't want to get too deep into it, and I want to let people figure those out for themselves. But how often were you like, would you come upon a moment and think to yourself, oh, this could be a really cool reference and like throw this in there? And same goes for like background characters. It was in the first book, it's in this book too, but the cafe with no name, you go in and there's maybe not characters named directly, but like allusions to characters in the background. It's like, how are you picking who's in this? Is it just like your favorite little background, guys from comics or whatnot?
It'll depend. In the first book I used Pandemonium just because Pandemonium makes me laugh. Like the idea of Pandemonium makes me laugh.
Yes.
So sometimes it's that. I'm like, what character can I throw in here that I know exists in this world that I know will make me laugh when I think about it? And other times it's New York. So everything was very purposeful in being like, this is what New York looks like. And so pulling from Spider-Man history to litter that and add my own spin on new characters who could come in and create that very lived in world. And of course, Spider-Man, it's 61 years right now, right?
Yeah,
this year. And so you have this decades long history of incredible work by incredible creators that of course you want to like pull in because they influenced you. And it's your way of being like, I love this character and this is how much I love him.
Right. Yeah. And first of all, yes, Pandemonium, we talked about it in the last interview, and I just was so thrilled when Pandemonium showed up. Like, even I had to Google and just be like, is this a real character? Like, this is insane. And it's the best kind of character to include. And there's another one in this book that kind of shows up in a similar manner, that had me just as excited. I actually knew about this character, but I was pumped as soon as he showed up. Yeah, so you are also, I feel like we can sort of start segueing into, well, sorry, before I segue, I do have to ask, there's a third book. How deep into the process for the third book are you? It seems like it's already been approved, like you already kind of know where it's going.
It's written. I turned in a draft about a month ago. So I turned in a first draft, and I'm waiting to get editorial notes on it, so I know what happens.
That's good. I would hope that you had an idea. Like, I wrote it, I had no clue what happened.
I know. Like, I wrote it a month ago, couldn't tell you. So yeah, it's in the bag. It's, I think, exciting. Everything comes to a head, which is fun and stressful. So, I put them through it. Peter and MJ, they're going through it.
Yeah, a climax is not necessarily always the most chill part of the story, so I'm excited to see what happens. You mentioned New York earlier, and I admittedly, as you're writing this book and as you're writing, I assume, the third book, I see you using social media. I see you tweeting and or threading, and whatever social media we're using at this point in time. And I always loved when you would throw out there like, yeah, I just spent like an hour just using Google Maps to make sure that this intersection that I reference is correct, and there's actually like an awning here and all this stuff. I mean, how many hours do you feel like you spent just making sure that it was the exact right spot in New York City? And like, how is that stressful or fun, or what is that like?
It's fun. I mean, I lived in New York for a little over a decade, and so I know the city in that way. But there are times when I'm like, nothing would be more embarrassing to me than someone being like, that subway doesn't go there.
Yeah.
Like, that's my nightmare, that someone reads this and is like, this girl's never been to New York.
Yeah.
So like there was a point where I couldn't remember. I was like, does this run over? Does this go over the river or under the river? And I was like texting my friend and I was like, am I in bananas? Like, what is, like, am I wrong? And so there is a lot of that. But one fun thing is getting to like go on Google Maps and be like, is there a high rise here that Spidey can sit on the side of?
Right.
Like one that like looks right and fulfills the need, so I don't have to invent it. I think the only thing so far that I've really just invented is putting a combination Pizza Hut and Taco Bell in Astoria so that he could fly over it. That isn't there because I
That being
just wanted
said,
it to happen.
that absolutely feels like something that would be in Astoria though. So
Right?
like I wouldn't doubt it for a second. Um yeah, it was funny reading it, and you know, a portion of Spider-Man's Bad Connection takes place where I used to live. So
Oh, really?
yes, you'd be talking about the train line. You'd be like, yeah, he's like taking the L to Lorimer. And I'd be like, I know that. And he would start describing it. And I was like picturing my old commute to work. I was like, wow,
Yep.
if you really nailed this, this is fully
Well,
accurate.
that I did every day for like over 10 years.
Yeah. And it's not just the city. New Yorkers, as with any Spider-Man story, play a pivotal role in Spider-Man's relationship to them. But one thing you do throughout this book, it's like a recurring bit that I love because I don't think it happens enough in Spider-Man stories, is when he's just like chilling on someone's roof or balcony and they're like, dude, like, what are you doing? I'm just trying to eat like dinner.
I love
Kind
it.
of just staring through my window right now on the phone. Um, that made me laugh every single time. And I just want to throw out there that I think it's incredible that you included it as often as you did. Because in real life, New Yorkers are not just going to be like, oh, it's cool, he's chilling there. They're going to be like, get off my roof. I have things to do.
Either they're like, that's awesome, or they're like, why are you squatting on my fire escape? Like, this is not somewhere for you to take a phone call, sir. Like,
exactly.
It's so funny to me because agreed. I'm like, I'm going to put this in as many times as I can.
Okay, well, now I'm gonna segue. We talked earlier that the Spider-Man book has more romance in it, between Peter and MJ, and that was very cute and adorable, and it was written very well. But you also have another project happening right now, that I also speed read this week, and enjoyed very much. Love Unlimited, Marvel's Love Unlimited, Gambit and Rogue. So I think that's super cool because it's really cool having mostly known your work from these like Spider-Man young adult novels, getting to then hop over to like a more adult comic book was cool. It was really cool to see your writing style translate, and it was cool because I could still see your voice like in both of them. But for you as a writer, kind of same comic book playground, you know, similar themes, but transitioning from that like young adult to like the two like sexiest X-Men characters, I guess, right? Like what like what is that like from you going from point A to point B?
It was fun. It's funny because like I pitched this as like a one line potential Infinity comic like a year ago or something. And I was like, it would be really fun to do like a Gambit Rogue heist competition because I think they're really fun, and they were my OTP before I knew what that meant. Like I've been shipping them since I was like 5, I feel like. And they're really, really fun characters to write separately and together. And so, yeah, it's a wildly different experience writing a comic book script versus writing prose already. And then what's fun about this is like you get to play in a more adult playground, and so they just get to make decisions. They don't have to worry about any other things. They're like, we're gonna go on a plane ride to England now, you know, and just do it, and they don't have to like stress over it. So that was kind of it takes that element out of it. of just people having agency to make the choices that they want to make because they're grown-ups.
Right.
And so that immediately shifts your thinking about how these characters live in the world. So you're starting from such a different place already.
Right. And so did this start for you as like, I want to write a romance between Gambit and Rogue, and then you had this idea for a heist in England? Or was it like, I want to write the heist idea, and then it kind of came to fruition as part of this like Love Unlimited series?
I think I just said, I'm trying to remember I think it was I knew it was for the Love Unlimited series. And I think I sent over like a couple of one-line pitches for what it could be, because they had asked me to work on a different one and I didn't have the time or something. And I was like, but in the future, here are some potential ideas for things I could do. And they liked the Gambit Rogue one, which if I'm gonna write Gambit and Rogue, it's gonna be a romance. So
I mean, it's like their whole thing.
Yeah.
In the best way possible. So one random thing I kind of want to bring up about it is like they both have such heavy accents.
Yeah.
That you got to write so much of that script where they like almost phonetic spelling for a lot of it, and trying to like write that. I thought it was funny, especially, I mean, it's been released for a little bit, so I'll talk about in the first issue. They're in like a cafe or a coffee or a restaurant or something, and they are talking about this vacation or heist that they want to go on, and their accents going back and forth. It was just so funny to read, and I found myself kind of like doing the voices like out loud. And then I thought, like, imagine you're in a cafe and these people are just sitting next to you talking with wildly different, equally thick accents. Like, that would be so distracting.
You'd be like, this is amazing. I never want to leave.
Just follow them around. Like, that's
yes.
that's all I could think about. So why England? Like, where did England come from?
I think I was like, what could be a heist? And obviously they're good guys. Like, I can't have them just robbing some random people. So then I was like, colonialism, let's go.
It's always the answer. It's the answer.
And obviously, like, I'm Indian American and we're not so far removed from the British occupation of India. Like, my grandparents were alive. And so that was just a really easy thing. Like, if you go to museums in India, and then you go to museums in England and you see all these artifacts that you're like, this isn't yours. Like,
yes,
like the big one for a lot of Indians is, of course, the Kohinoor diamond, which they took. And so that was just it was like a layup of a heist, right? Where you're like, okay, heroes, this still tracks. Like, yes, steal and bring back these like colonial treasures.
Yeah, and it's such the perfect context for characters like Gambit and Rogue to be having fun. Like, it's such a fun idea that they really love this idea of date night is a competition heist.
Yeah.
Which is great. Like, that's so fun. It's such a perfect launch pad for a story like that. But you did mention how different it is writing scripts for a comic compared to writing prose for like a young adult novel. And this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is like exclusive for Marvel Unlimited, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So does that affect how you're writing that script? Like, do you have to write it in a really specific way so you know it's going to fit in the context of Marvel Unlimited?
Yeah, it's funny. This was my first Unlimited comic that I'd ever written. Prior to this, I'd only written like traditional print, you know, regular comics. And I sent the first draft in to my editor and she wrote back. She was like, this is great. You don't need page numbers. And I was like, you're right. I don't need page numbers. Because usually it's like page 1 or like page 2, 3 spread, whatever you go. This, it's like just panels. I'm just numbering the panels all the way down to like whatever, 37, whatever it was. And doing it that way. And also just thinking about the form, like there's this great Carola Borelli and Carlos Lopez. Carola wrote drew it and Carlos colored it. In the 4th issue, I was like, they're gonna fall down a hole because like it's an infinity comic. You get to scroll with them as they fall down this very, very long hole, like very Alice in Wonderlandy. And it was just so fun to see what they did with the art there and
Yeah.
how they brought that piece of the script to life was so cool, because there are opportunities in this format that you don't have in print format.
Right. That's actually exactly like the panel that made me write that question down, was because I thought it was so fun as I was
Right.
scrolling, and I was like, how did that come about? Like, how, like, was that something that you specified? Like, yeah, and then
Mm-hmm.
like we're gonna be falling down the hole, and then it was scrolling down. I thought it was so cool, and you're right, they nailed it. So in regards to that, like, how much are you communicating with the artist on this? Like, I mean, with a book like Spider-Man's Bad Connection, you write it, and then I'm assuming that someone just makes the cover an excellent cover. It looks really, really great, but you're not like collabing with them on the cover
Right.
the way that you would be here. So how often were you communicating back and forth with the whole creative team for something like this?
I wasn't. Marvel, there might be situations in which this is different, but for the most part, it's me to the editor, editor to the writer, and colorist, and then back to the editor, and then back to me. I never spoke to the art team directly, because but what I do in my script, so like for that falling panel, it was like in the script, it was something like panels 10 through 12. We're going to treat this like as they're falling. I want to see the motion. There are no breaks between the panels. Like, I describe how I see it in my head, with room for the artist, of course, to like make it their own, because they're as much a creator as I am. And that's sort of how it works. Like, I will just describe the image I see in my head and how I visualize these panels in the best way I can. And then the art comes back. And then I'll make notes of like, oh, this isn't working for the story, or like, this is great, whatever. And then it goes back to the editor, who then takes those notes to the artist. So like, I never spoke to anyone directly,
Yeah.
which I think is usually sometimes the case. Because I think it could also complicate when you have too many people
Right.
discussing things. So
Too many cooks in that kitchen.
yeah.
Yeah, someone once told me that there was no like set or like good, like on paper, good way to write a comic book script. It's kind of just like how you figure it out and what works best for you. Um, and I've always thought that that was really interesting. That like there's recommended ways and hypothetical processes, but it's kind of more just like this is what I visualize, and like go. And there's a certain level of trust there.
Yeah.
Were you ever nervous? I mean, incredibly talented artists, so I'm sure that you weren't. But were there anything that like you sent out and you're like, I picture it this way? I mean, I know you brought up the falling panel, but and then it comes back and you're like, that is just so beyond what I was imagining it was going to be.
There's actually in the second issue, I think, when they're on the plane, of course, it's this like flirty, sweet moment between them. But there's this moment where Gambit like leans over Rogue to like look out the window, and Carla Borelli made it like so sexy.
Yeah.
That I was
There's a
like,
few
you
panels in there that I'm like, all right.
like knocked it out of the park, where I like in my head, obviously it was like they're hot, like this is
Yeah.
the couple is great, there's energy between them, but she really like brought that out in this like what I thought was just like a sweet little panel. I was like, oh no, this is great, this is like perfectly bringing to life what is so good about the two of them somehow in
Yeah.
this like sort of like nothing moment, you know. It was
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredible. So I know the issues have sort of just come out, so they're
Mhm.
public. I feel like we can talk about them.
Yeah.
But you know, anything? Can we talk about the villain of Rogue Gambit?
So issue 5 came out. I know this interview is dropping Wednesday next week.
Yeah, I believe it came out like the day we're recording this, though.
Yeah, so issue 5 came out today,
Yes,
August 31st.
I read it this morning. I promise.
So yeah, I think we can talk about it. If you don't want to know, I guess stop listening.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll give like I'm gonna count down from 3, and if you don't want to hear who the villain is, then skedaddle and then come back. um, 3, 2, 1. Clandestine, and this guy who I will say, reading the issue that came out today, he has like his big dramatic like villain reveal, and he gives like a dramatic villain speech, and I love you got to do the like when I supposedly died, and then the little like thing in the bottom, it's like this happened in 1990.
Yeah.
I thought that was great. So I feel like it ties into what you were saying earlier about just the British and the history of colonization, all of this sort of stuff. But why him?
I wanted somebody who could feasibly be this person, and could feasibly have been alive for so long,
Yeah.
since, however long ago. And, it's hard. One thing that people might not know is that writing in this massive industry and in this company that has been around for so long, and sometimes it's hard to like be able to create your own things because they have such a long history.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, is there really no one you can use who exists, right?
Yeah.
Because in my head, I was like, oh, it's going to be this like secret count who's been alive forever and immortal and blah, blah, blah. And then they're like, actually, why don't you like see if there's someone who might fit the bill? And so I went off and like did some research. And this guy seemed like he'd only really been used once, in a very incredible story by Alan Davis. And so it just felt like a fun little like nod to a really cool story that existed like 20 years ago. And so that's sort of where that came from, of like getting to participate. And that's one of the fun things about writing for Marvel, is that you get to like actively be a part of the history of Marvel while you're writing it. It's really cool.
Yeah, that last thing you said is specifically what stood out to me when I saw that little yellow text box. I don't know, that made me so excited, like for you. I was like, yeah, Preeti's got the history of Marvel thing in the corner. It's incredible. Yeah, so how much like back and forth is there for a comic like this that is, I mean, presumably like canon or somewhat canon to like the Marvel universe, things that you can and can't do? I mean, it sounds like you had fairly free reign, like not like too restrictive. But does that, like when you're submitting ideas and stuff, is that like a fear you have that they're going to come back at you and be like, none of this works in the canon?
I mean, that's always a fear when you're writing anything, that someone will come back and be like, none of this works. But no, I think getting to write IP, which is intellectual property, owned by somebody else, so characters that you didn't create and you don't own, there's always like, you're playing in someone else's sandbox, right? Like you can tell the stories you want to tell, but it has to work within their construct. Like you don't get to have that. So that, like, letting that go several years ago has made the experience of writing IP so much easier and better, because you just can't be precious about it. Like there are certain things obviously your editor will always have a conversation with you, but at the end of the day, I'm like, it's not mine. I don't own it. So I just want to be able to tell the stories I want to tell and work with my editor to figure out the best way to do that works for both of us. And that's sort of how I approach it.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way to think about it. Relieves a little bit of pressure.
Yeah.
Speaking of relieving pressure, in this story compared to Spider-Man's Bad Connection, to keep webbing things together, you got to go from a lot of science to history. Was that nice?
Yes. I hate working on scientific things. Like I can't tell you how many YouTube videos I watched for the Spider-Man series of these wonderful scientists who take the time to explain concepts in the most simplistic way. And I still will be like, hold on. Okay, what you're telling me is this. And of course, there's like an element of like, woo woo, it's comics. Like, don't think too hard about it, but it can't be like completely egregious either. So it was nice to go on the like history route and just be able to like think about, it's not that I'm not a historian, but I have a cultural connection, right? And so really leaning on that aspect of things was so much easier.
Yeah, I also
the other things.
Can imagine, like, with science, it's a lot of like equations and being like, okay, well, does this add up? And if this happens, would it actually react this way? And there's more hypotheticals, whereas with history, you're like, this is history. Like it's a story that's been told, so I can just pull from that, and that's nice. That's way simpler. Okay, well, moving on from the comic, there was one more thing you told me that you wanted to talk about. And part of the reason that this is coming out a week from today instead of the day that we record it, I just found out what it is. So I'm really excited. If you want to go ahead and talk about your other exciting new opportunity / project coming up.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm having a very big Marvel week. So officially Wednesday, September 6th, today, for me in the future, it will be today. I am co-hosting the new season of Women of Marvel, the podcast that Marvel puts out, with Ellie Pyle, who is an editor in the Spider-Man office over at Marvel Comics. And it's just really cool. Like, this whole season of the show is focused on Marvel's female characters. So every episode is a specific female character. And we talk to experts who would be, sort of like involved in the world that character is involved in. So maybe not comics people. We also obviously talk to editors and writers and illustrators and people who touch this character creatively. But, for someone, I got to talk to like a fashion expert about Emma Frost and things that Emma Frost wears. And this person they were not a comics person, but they picked up on so much of who Emma Frost is as a character based entirely on like 7 comic book covers. It's a really cool season of this show, and I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, you are just living a nerd's dream right now. That's so exciting. So how long ago did you record all this? Sounds like you recorded the season already and then it'll drop.
Mm-hmm.
So how long ago did you record it, and when is it coming out? When are the episodes dropping, I guess is what I'm asking.
First episode drops Wednesday, September 6th. So today.
Okay, so today.
The first episode is out.
Today on Wednesday the 6th. That's today.
Today, in quotes.
Today, yeah. Journalism is weird. Time is never as it seems. And that's a weekly series, just for someone who doesn't know, who's potentially watching this interview right now?
Yes, it's weekly. We recorded everything over the last several months. It's fun. I signed the contract to do it back in April, and we've been working on it since then, like scripting and interviewing guests and all that stuff. And it's been coming together. We have an incredible team at Marvel's audio side. It's really cool. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to last like the fall, basically.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll be listening because it sounds incredible. I mean, that Emma Frost pitch alone is an episode that I would love to listen to and do a little deep dive into. So listen, with that, I'm going to let you go because I know that you have things to do. You're clearly a very busy person, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. I wish you well. Is there anything else you want the people to know before we get out of here?
Spider-Man's Bad Connection is out now. Please pick it up. It's a really good time. And the first book is Spider-Man Social Dilemma, which I believe is coming out in paperback soonish, but is out in the world now.
Amazing. Yes, Spider-Man's Bad Connection out now. Go get it. Get it for yourself. Get it for your kid. Get it for your niece or nephew or just a random child in the street. Buy books, hand them to them. They all should be reading it. It's amazing. There's that. There's also Marvel's Love Unlimited, Gambit and Rogue on the Marvel Unlimited app. That is also out now by the time you're watching this. I believe the whole
one issue will be left.
One issue will be left. So you can read the whole thing in a day and then only have to wait 24 hours for the exciting, exhilarating conclusion. So Spider-Man's Bad Connection, Love Unlimited, Gambit and Rogue, and Women of Marvel podcast, which first episode out today.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. It's a big make today. You know how they say make mine Marvel, make today Preeti. That's what that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, thank you everybody for watching. I have been Hunter Radesi from the Streamr. This has been Preeti Chhibber. I was going to let you introduce yourself and was like, you know what? I'm on a roll. Have a good one.